The clatter of ceramic on formica was a familiar sound, a metronome counting down the last minutes of her freedom before the next 12-hour shift began. Eliza guided her wheelchair to the small booth in the corner of the diner, the one with just enough space to park beside the table without blocking the aisle. The vinyl of the seat was cracked, the air thick with the smell of burnt coffee and frying bacon. It was her church, this noisy, greasy sanctuary between the antiseptic quiet of her apartment and the managed chaos of the hospital. She was halfway through a plate of lukewarm fries when a shadow fell over her table. A man stood there, tall and broad in a suit so dark it seemed to drink the light. It was tailored with a precision that was utterly out of place among the worn-out work jackets and faded jeans of the other patrons. Beside him, sitting with military stillness, was a Belgian Malinois, its coat the color of sable, its intelligent eyes fixed on its master. The dog wore a heavy leather harness but no leash. It needed no leash. "Can I sit here?" the man asked. His voice was low, a gravelly baritone that cut through the diner's hum without rising in volume. Eliza looked around. The diner was packed, every other table and counter stool occupied. She could have said no. She should have said no. There was something in his stillness that was more intimidating than any overt threat. It was a predatory calm, the absolute confidence of an animal that has never known a challenger it could not defeat. However, the exhaustion from her shift had sanded down her edges, leaving her too tired for confrontation. She gestured to the empty side of the booth with a fry. "It's a free country." He slid into the booth opposite her, his movements economical and silent. The dog lay down at his feet, tucking itself into the small space with a sigh that was barely audible. The man placed his hands on the table. They were clean, large, with a heavy gold signet ring on his right pinky finger. No wedding band. The faint scent of cedarwood and something else, something metallic and cold, drifted across the table. A waitress, a woman named Flo who had been refilling Eliza's coffee for 3 years, approached the table. She looked at the man, and a flicker of something Eliza had never seen on the older woman's face, pure, undiluted fear, made her sit up straighter. "Just coffee," the man said, his eyes never leaving Eliza. "Black." Flo nodded, her hand trembling slightly as she filled a mug from the carafe she carried. She set it down and fled without a word. The entire diner had not gone silent, but the quality of the noise had changed. The volume was the same, but the energy was different. It was the watchfulness of a herd that has scented a wolf. "You're a nurse," he stated. It was not a question. Eliza's gaze dropped to her light blue scrubs, the hospital logo embroidered on the chest. "Something like that. You work at St. Jude's emergency department." Her fingers tightened around her fork. St. Jude's was 5 blocks away. It was a logical guess, but the certainty in his tone made it feel like surveillance. "You've been watching me? I notice things," he corrected softly. "It's a useful skill." He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes, the color of dark, aged whiskey, assessing her over the rim of the mug. "My name is Dante." He did not offer a last name. She did not offer hers in return. An unspoken agreement passed between them. They were 2 strangers sharing a table in a crowded diner, and that was all they would be. Except it wasn't. The air was thick with things unsaid, with a history he carried into the room like a weapon. The bell over the diner door chimed, admitting a blast of cold city air. 2 men walked in. They were not dressed in suits like Dante, but in leather jackets and heavy boots. They were big, carrying their size with an arrogance that was meant to be seen. Their eyes scanned the room, bypassing the families and the lone workers, and landed on their table. On Dante. A low sound, a vibration more than a noise, came from under the table. Eliza felt it through the floor. The dog, Cerberus as Dante had quietly called him, had lifted his head from his paws. A deep, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that promised violence. Dante did not look down. He rested his hand on the edge of the table, a subtle gesture of command. The growling stopped. The dog remained poised, a coiled spring of muscle and teeth. The two men started toward their table. The clatter and chatter of the diner finally died, sputtering into a dead, anxious silence. Flo froze behind the counter, a plate of eggs in her hand. Everyone was watching. Dante's eyes were fixed on the approaching men, but he spoke to Eliza, his voice a murmur that was for her alone. Do not move. Do not speak. Look at your food. Her training kicked in. In the ER, the first rule of a volatile situation was to make yourself small, unthreatening. She dropped her gaze to her fries, her heart hammering a frantic, panicked rhythm against her ribs. This was wrong. This was dangerous. She was a nurse, a person who patched up the consequences of violence, not someone who sat beside its cause. The men stopped at their booth. The smell of cheap aftershave and stale cigarette smoke filled the air. Gallo? The bigger of the two men said, his voice a sneer. Fancy seeing you here, slumming it with the common folk. Dante took another sip of his coffee. He set the mug down with a soft click. Moretti, you and your brother should know better than to approach me in a public place. It's bad for business. Frightens the customers. Our business is with you, the second man snarled. The commission sent a message. Your territory in the docks is being reconsidered. The commission does not send messages through dogs, Dante replied, his voice still unervingly calm. They send them through men. You are not men. Now, leave my table. The first man, Moretti, laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. He leaned forward, planting his meaty hands on the table, his gaze flicking to Eliza for the first time. Or what? You gonna have your girlfriend here stick us with a needle? That was when the dog moved. It did not bark. It did not snarl. It rose from the floor in a silent, fluid motion, its body low to the ground. Its lips peeled back from its teeth in a silent display of lethal intent. Cerberus did not look at the men. He looked at Dante, awaiting a single word. The tension in the room became a physical thing, a pressure against Eliza's eardrums. The promise of bloodshed was so profound, so absolute, that she could taste it on her tongue, metallic and bitter like blood. Dante held up one hand, a barely perceptible gesture. The dog froze, a statue of impending violence. You have 5 seconds to leave my sight, Dante said, and for the first time, the cold calm in his voice was gone, replaced by something ancient and final. Before I reconsider my policy on public disturbances. The Moretti brothers looked at Dante, then at the dog, and some of their bluster seemed to evaporate. They saw something in his eyes that made them take a step back. Then another. Without another word, they turned and walked out of the diner, the bell over the door chiming their retreat. The silence they left behind was heavier than the noise had been. Slowly, the hum of conversation started again, but it was subdued, cautious. Dante turned his gaze back to Eliza. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone. You cannot go home, he said. Eliza stared at him, her mind struggling to catch up. What are you talking about? I have a shift in 6 hours. They saw you with me, he explained, as if discussing the weather. They know your face. They might not know your name yet, but they will. My enemies are not creative, but they are thorough. Your apartment is no longer safe. The hospital is no longer safe. Fear, cold and sharp, finally pierced through her exhaustion. You can't be serious. This is my life. You can't just... I can, he interrupted. And I am. You are a witness. In their world, that makes you a liability. In my world, it makes you my responsibility. He stood, pulling a few bills from his wallet and dropping them on the table. They were crisp $100 bills, far more than enough to cover their coffee and her fries. My car is outside. We are leaving. She looked at him, at the absolute certainty in his face, and knew it was not a request. He had drawn a circle around her with his presence, and now the circle was closing. She had walked into a diner for a plate of fries, but she was not walking out the same way she had come in. A man named Dante, with eyes like whiskey and a dog that moved like a shadow of death, had decided her life was now his concern. And in his world, Concern was just another word for possession. His driver, a man built like a refrigerator, handled her chair with a surprising gentleness, lifting it into the back of a black town car as if it weighed nothing. Eliza transferred herself to the leather seat, her movements practiced and efficient. Dante slid in beside her, and the door closed with a solid, final thunk, sealing them in a world of tinted windows and conditioned air. The dog hopped into the front passenger seat, turning to watch them with its unervingly intelligent eyes. They drove in silence through the city streets. Eliza watched the familiar landscape of her neighborhood slide by, feeling like she was watching it from a great distance. Her small, third-floor apartment, the grocery store on the corner, the park she sometimes wheeled through on her days off. It all looked like a life that belonged to someone else now. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice tight. "Somewhere safe," Dante replied, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Safe, she thought, was the last thing she felt. She was in a car with a man whose name made other dangerous men back down. A man who commanded a trained attack dog with a flick of his wrist. She was a nurse. She dealt in sterile gauze and 4 drips, in comforting frightened patients and charting vital signs. This world of unspoken threats and territorial disputes was as foreign to her as the surface of the moon. The car pulled into the underground garage of a sleek, modern high-rise in the city's most expensive district. The driver escorted them to a private elevator, which opened directly into a sprawling penthouse apartment. The place was cold, not in temperature but in spirit. The furniture was minimalist and expensive, all clean lines and shades of gray, black and white. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, but it felt like a fortress, not a home. There were no photographs, no books left out, no signs of a life lived. Only order and control. "You will stay here," Dante said, his voice echoing slightly in the large, empty space. "My men will be outside the door. No one will get to you." "For how long?" "Until the situation with the Morettas is resolved." "And when will that be?" A flicker of something dark crossed his face. "Soon." Over the next few days, Eliza learned the rhythms of her new prison. A silent woman brought her meals on a tray. Dante was gone for long stretches, returning late at night, the scent of the cold clinging to his wool coat. He would sit in the living area, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, and stare out at the city lights. Cerberus would lie at his feet, a silent shadow. They rarely spoke. The silence between them was a living thing, filled with the questions she was too afraid to ask and the answers he would never give. She watched him when he wasn't looking. She noticed the faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow. She saw the tension he carried in his shoulders, a weight that never seemed to leave him, even when he was sitting perfectly still. One evening, she found him in a room he used as an office. The door was ajar. He was standing in front of his desk, looking at a single framed photograph. Curious, she moved her chair closer, peering through the gap. The photo was of 2 young men, their arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. One was a younger Dante, his face less guarded, the hardness not yet settled in his eyes. The other man looked like him, an older brother perhaps, with the same dark hair but a wider, more reckless smile. Dante seemed to sense her presence. He turned, his face a mask of cold fury. "This is my private office." "I'm sorry," she said, starting to back her chair away. His expression softened, the anger receding as quickly as it had appeared. He sighed, a weary, tired sound. He picked up the photograph. "My brother Marco," he said, his voice rough. "He was supposed to take over from our father. He was the one everyone loved. Charming. Fearless. What happened to him?" Eliza asked softly. "He was reckless," Dante said, his gaze distant. "He trusted the wrong people. He brought a man into our family, vouched for him. The man was a traitor. He set up a meeting with the Moretta's father. It was an ambush. Marco? He didn't survive." He paused, his thumb tracing the glass over his brother's smiling face. "I was his underboss. I was supposed to be there, But he told me to handle something else, something trivial. He went alone because he didn't want to seem weak. His pride cost him his life. And I let him go. The confession hung in the air between them. It was the first crack in his armor, the first glimpse of the man beneath the cold, controlled exterior. He was not just a monster. He was a man shaped by grief and guilt. He carried the weight of his brother's death, a debt he could never repay. He set the photo down, his back to her. The Moretti brothers are the sons of the man who killed him. This is not just business. It is a blood feud that my brother started, and I will be the one to finish it. That night, the ground between them shifted. He was still her captor, the source of her danger. But now she saw the wound he carried. She understood that his control, his coldness, was a shield built around a place of profound failure. She, a healer of physical wounds, found herself looking at a man whose injuries were so deep they had become the very structure of his soul. A few days later, the fragile peace was shattered. Dante received a call. His face went rigid as he listened, his knuckles white on the phone. "Where?" he bit out. He listened for another moment. "Keep him stable. I'm on my way." He hung up and turned to Eliza. "One of my men has been shot. They can't take him to a hospital. It would bring the police, questions we cannot answer." His eyes met hers, and there was a silent, desperate question in them. "You need a nurse," she said, understanding immediately. "I need you," he corrected. This was it, the line. She could say no. She could refuse to be drawn any deeper into his violent world. It would be the smart thing to do, the sane thing. But she looked at his face, at the raw urgency there, and saw not a mafia boss, but a man trying to keep one of his own from dying. She thought of her oath. She thought of the man in the photograph, the brother he had failed to protect. "Get me a bag," she said, her voice steady. "Tell me what supplies you have. I'll make a list of what I need." Therefore, she made her choice. She crossed the line from witness to accomplice, her medical skills becoming a tool for a world she was never meant to enter. The safe house was a nondescript brownstone in a quiet part of the city. Inside, the scene was anything but quiet. A young man, no older than her, lay on a dining room table that had been covered in plastic sheeting. He was pale, his breathing shallow. A makeshift bandage on his abdomen was soaked through with blood. Eliza took control. The years of ER training kicked in, pushing aside the fear and the strangeness of the situation. She became a professional. "I need boiling water, clean towels, any antiseptic you have, and a light source I can direct. Someone hold pressure on that wound. Harder." Dante's men, large and intimidating figures who had previously looked at her with suspicion, now moved to obey her commands without question. She was in her element. Dante stood back, watching her, his expression a mixture of awe and apprehension. For the next hour, she worked. She cleaned the wound, her hands steady as she located the bullet. It was a through and through, a miracle of bad aim. It had torn through muscle but missed any major organs. She packed the wound, stitched the entry and exit points with a sterilized needle and thread from a sewing kit, and bandaged it tightly. "He needs antibiotics and fluids," she said, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist. "And he needs to be monitored for infection. He's lost a lot of blood, but he'll live. If he's lucky." The tension in the room broke. The injured man's friends let out a collective sigh of relief. Dante walked over to the table and looked down at his soldier. Then he looked at Eliza. The respect in his eyes was profound. Later, back in the penthouse, the adrenaline wore off, leaving them both drained. They sat in the silent living room, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. "You should have let him die," he said quietly. "It would have been smarter for you." "I'm a nurse," she replied, her voice tired. "It's not my job to decide who deserves to live." He turned to look at her, his whiskey-colored eyes searching her face. "You did not panic. Not in the diner. Not tonight. I have known hardened soldiers who have less courage than you." "It's not courage," she said. "It's just what I do. You focus on the problem in front of you and you shut everything else out." Eliza, he said, and the way he spoke her name was different. It was not a label. It was a sound that held weight, a sound that held respect. It was a confession of a different kind. A confession that he saw her, truly saw her, not as a disabled woman, not as a witness, but as an equal. The moment was broken by the ringing of his phone. He answered, and as he listened, the mask of control slammed back into place, colder and harder than before. "What?" he said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. He hung up without another word and turned to her, his face grim. "That was my head of security. The Morettas have been busy. They know who you are. They know where you lived." He paused, and the air crackled with menace. "They paid a visit to your apartment. It's been ransacked. They left a message on your bedroom mirror. It said, 'We know what he's protecting.'" The floor seemed to drop out from under her. She had thought that by helping him, by becoming useful, she was earning her safety. But she was wrong. Her proximity to him, her new value in his eyes, had not made her safer. It had made her the target. Dante's fists were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. The predatory calm was gone, replaced by a rage so pure and cold it seemed to lower the temperature of the room. He had brought this danger to her door. He had tried to contain it, to manage it, but he had failed. He had failed to protect someone under his care. Again. "This ends," he said, his voice a low growl. "Tonight." He walked to a hidden panel in the wall, pressing his palm against it. It slid open to reveal a collection of firearms, arranged with surgical precision. He selected a handgun, checking the magazine with an efficient, practiced motion. Cerberus rose to his feet, whining softly, sensing the shift in his master. "You will stay here," Dante commanded, not looking at her. "You will not open the door for anyone but me." "Dante, wait," Eliza said, wheeling her chair forward. "Don't just go in there blind. They're expecting you to be angry. They're expecting you to react." "They killed my brother," he snarled, turning to face her. "They threatened you. There is no more strategy. Only settlement." "You're right," she said, her voice cutting through his rage, calm and clear like a surgeon's scalpel. "So let's be smart about it." Her mind was racing, piecing things together. The ER had taught her to find patterns in chaos. "The man I treated tonight, his name is Leo. Before he passed out, he was delirious. He kept mumbling a name. Benny and something about the fish market. He said, 'Benny's got the cold stuff at the market.'" Dante froze, the gun still in his hand. "Benny is Paolo Moretti's cousin. He runs their distribution out of the Fulton Fish Market. The cold stuff, he means their product, kept on ice. Leo must have overheard them planning something when he was shot," Eliza reasoned. "They think you're coming for their father, for their main office. They won't be expecting you to hit their supply line. It's their biggest weakness." He stared at her, the raw anger in his eyes slowly being replaced by a cold, tactical light. She had given him more than an idea. She had given him a weapon. She had used her professional skill, the ability to listen, to observe details others missed in a crisis, and turned it into a key that could unlock his victory. She was not a liability to be protected. She was an asset. "You are not like anyone I have ever known, Eliza," he said, his voice quiet with a dangerous new intensity. He holstered the weapon at the small of his back, his movements once again fluid and controlled. He was no longer a man driven by rage. He was a hunter with a clear target. He made a series of short, clipped phone calls, his voice low and authoritative, issuing orders. When he was done, he turned back to her. He was going to leave. He was going to walk into the heart of his enemy's territory to end a war. He walked over to her, stopping directly in front of her chair. He crouched down, bringing his face level with hers. The proximity was startling, intimate. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, feel the warmth radiating from his body. "When this is over," he said, his voice a low promise, "you will be free to go. I will give you a new name, a new life, anywhere you want. You will be safe. I will owe you that debt." She looked into his eyes and saw the future he was offering her. A quiet life, an anonymous existence, free from the violence and the shadows. It was everything she should have wanted. But looking at him now, at this dangerous, broken, and formidable man who saw her with more clarity than anyone ever had, she realized that safety was no longer the only thing she craved. The final confrontation was not a blaze of gunfire. It was surgical. Dante's men, acting on Eliza's information, hit the Moretus operation at the fish market, crippling their finances and seizing evidence that implicated them in federal crimes. At the same time, Dante requested a sit-down with the Moretti brothers and the heads of the other families. The meeting took place in the back room of a quiet Italian restaurant, the air thick with the smell of garlic and unspoken threats. Eliza waited in the penthouse, the silence stretching her nerves thin. Every passing car on the street below sounded like a threat. Dante returned just before dawn. He was unscathed, but his suit was rumpled, and he looked bone-weary. He walked into the living room where she was waiting, Cerberus padding silently at his heels. "It's done," he said. "The Morettis have lost the support of the commission. Their assets are frozen. They have been retired." He did not need to elaborate on what that meant. Cost had been paid, not in his blood, but in the cold finality of his actions. He had won, but the victory had only served to carve the lines on his face deeper. He walked to the bar and poured 2 glasses of the amber liquid. He brought one to her, his fingers brushing against hers as she took it. The brief contact sent a jolt through her. "The offer stands," he said, taking a seat opposite her. "My people can have you on a plane by noon. A new identity, a house, enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You will never have to see this world, or me, again." He was giving her the out he had promised. The clean break. She looked around the cold, beautiful apartment that had been her prison. She looked at the silent, watchful dog. And she looked at Dante, the man who had seen her strength when most people only saw her chair. He had dragged her into the darkness. But in that darkness, she had found a part of herself she never knew existed. She took a sip of the whiskey. It burned a warm path down her throat. "What if I don't want a new life?" she asked, her voice steady. He stilled, the glass halfway to his lips. His eyes locked on hers, searching, questioning. "This life, it is not for you, Eliza. It is violent and it is ugly. I will not make you a part of it." "You didn't make me a part of it," she said softly. "You just showed me I was already strong enough to survive it." She wheeled her chair from the center of the room to the vast window overlooking the city. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale rose. It was his city, a kingdom built on shadows and fear. She set her glass down on the wide marble sill, the sound a quiet click in the silent room. She did not look back at him. She did not need to. Her choice was made not in words but in the simple, deliberate act of staying. In claiming her place beside the window in his home, in his world. She had heard the word family her whole life. She had never heard it mean what it meant now, in the quiet of the coming dawn.